The Moss Report is brought to you by MycoLife, makers of the world's best mushroom extracts, including the Moss Method mushroom formula, available exclusively at mycolife.us. Hello, healers. My name is Ben, and this is the Moss Report. I'm here today with my father, author and founder of the Moss Report, Dr. Ralph W. Moss. And we're joined with our special guest, Chris Wark. And Chris has a very interesting platform of his own. He's also an author and a cancer survivor. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I know you were battling cancer. Just wanted to do a check-in and see how you're feeling, how things going
Still
for you.
alive as of my last follow-up last year, cancer-free, and just feeling great. I was diagnosed in 2003, so we're coming up on my 22nd anniversary. Is that right? Or 23rd, 22nd. That's right, in December. So, of colon cancer. So yeah, I'm very thankful to be alive.
Well, you look fit and tan and happy, so that's great to see.
I've been, immersing myself in your book, enjoying it very much.
Thank you.
You're a good writer.
Well, I appreciate you, and we talked about this when I interviewed you. But I found out about you and questioning chemotherapy, the book you wrote in early 2004, and when I was in the very beginning stages of trying to survive cancer. And it was, your work was very informative to me, and I appreciate it so much. I mean, it really is invaluable because there really, as far as I could tell, there really wasn't anyone else that had written a book like yours that was sort of telling the truth about cancer treatment and survival and sort of an inside peek at the industry. And, I was like anybody else. I just assumed everything was on the up and up in medicine. Right?
Well, their stocks kept going up.
Everybody
and up,
is super honest and ethical, and that's all they want to do is just help people, right?
Yeah. Of course, at one point I considered updating questioning chemotherapy, but things had shifted so much in cancer treatment in the past 20 years, as I'm sure you're aware, that it was, hopeless. I'd have to write an entirely different book, which in a sense I did in my Cancer Incorporated book and the latest book, The Moss Method. So it's still valid. I think some of the points that I made were still valid, but I'm glad that they had that positive effect on you. For our viewers who may not be familiar with your story, maybe you could repeat that very dramatic sequence of events that you narrate in the first couple of chapters of your book.
Yeah, happy to do it. I was diagnosed in December 2003 with colon cancer. I was 26, newlywed. I'd been married just 2 years, no kids yet. And, cancer diagnosis is just a shock, right? At any age, but it's especially, I think, traumatic to be diagnosed as a young person versus diagnosed in your 70s or 80s, right? Because you just feel like, my life is like this feels so unfair, that my life's going to be cut short by this disease. And that was, the diagnosis was preceded by abdominal pain, that was sort of mysterious abdominal pain that eventually I was referred to a gastroenterologist. I did a colonoscopy and found a golf ball sized tumor in my colon and said, hey, we got to get you into surgery right away and get this thing out of you before it spreads and kills you. And so I was like, okay, I didn't know anything about medicine or cancer, anything. So, I had surgery on December 30th, 2003. They took out a third of my large intestine, or third of the colon. That's where the tumor was. When I woke up, they said you're stage 3C. which was worse than they had hoped. I think the doctors were hoping I would be stage 2. And at that time, if you're stage 2, you have surgery and you go home, and that's it. But stage 3 meant chemotherapy.
To explain to our viewers, I mean, stage 3 would be either due to the size of the tumor, but especially to the presence of lymph node metastases, which you
That's
had
right.
4, I believe, out of
Yeah.
over 40.
49 lymph nodes removed, 4 were positive. So stage 3C. So the conversation shifted to chemo. And a couple things happened in the hospital, which are comical, but also there's, it just opened my eyes to this giant disconnect between healthcare and actual health. And that was the first meal that they served me after removing a third of my large intestines was a sloppy Joe, which is like prison food, right? Yeah. So,
Mystery
just
meat.
ground up mystery meat, slopped on a bun. I mean, it's like, this is what they're serving cancer patients in hospitals. I mean, it was such a shock. And I was not a health food guy, but I mean, I just, everybody knows a sloppy Joe is like, that's bottom of the barrel, industrial cafeteria stuff right there. So that got the wheels turning a little bit. And then a few days later, when they said you can go home, my surgeon came in to check on me, and I just happened to ask him, hey, is there any food I need to avoid? And he said, no, just don't lift anything heavier than a beer. Right. So, I mean, it's like nobody cares. It doesn't matter what you eat. I mean, I have enough common sense to know that something does not add up. And I'd actually in college worked at a Wild Oats, which got bought out by Whole Foods. So, I mean, like, I knew about health food. I wasn't eating it.
And your mother was sort of
And my
into
mom
it
was
also,
into healthy
right?
food, but she wasn't like today's health food moms. I mean, she was weird for the 80s and 90s, but she wasn't a vegetarian or a vegan. She wasn't, but she did love the health food store, and she loved to buy Sprouts and kefir, and took lots of supplements, and had stacks and stacks and stacks of books by Paul Bragg and Pablo Areola, and the famous Kevin Trudeau Natural Cures book, all these books. And so she was a health enthusiast. And so I had, just a sort of a basic knowledge of that. I mean, she introduced me to chiropractic care when I was probably 10 or 11, 12, something like that. So anyway, like, I was familiar with that world, and I just knew that, like, when the hospital served me a sloppy Joe and the surgeon said it didn't matter what I ate, and basically gave me permission to drink alcohol, like it didn't matter, I was like, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't add up. Like, something is missing here. I don't know what it is, but I feel like I need to take care of myself. I feel like I need to make changes in my life. And I think a lot of cancer patients have that innate sense that they need to make changes in their life, that they have a responsibility in their health. I mean, I've talked to countless cancer patients in the last 20 years. And if I ask them, why do you think you got cancer? They all say the same thing. They say, well, I haven't been taking care of myself, and I've been under a lot of stress. I mean, you just hear that every time. And doctors are quick to dismiss stress. And many of them, although I feel like the tide's turning some, but many of them historically have been very quick to dismiss diet and lifestyle as being contributors to cancer. But we know that both of those factors are significant. And I go into great detail in my book. There's so much evidence that is connecting diet and lifestyle to cancer, and it's connecting stress to cancer. And we can get into stress in a minute. I mean, it's a sort of a nebulous term, and it helps to really drill it down to finer points. But at that point in my journey, I didn't know anything, and all I had was my instincts, my intuition, my faith, a little bit of common sense, and I go home from the hospital. I'm recovering from surgery as I wean myself off the pain medication quickly. And really, as I sobered up, I just thought about my future. And I thought about, what chemotherapy would do to me, because I'd seen what chemotherapy does to people. And it's frightening. And, and again, it's not as bad now as it was then. Now there's immunotherapies, treatment has changed a lot, but back then, chemo was aggressively over prescribed, and patients were not given appropriate doses typically, and it was horribly destructive. And anybody you ask would say, the treatment seems worse than the disease.
A common mantra
Right.
among patients.
And so I didn't want to do it. Right. I didn't want to do it. I just felt like, gosh, I don't want to. I had just an innate sense that it was going to be really bad for me.
Chris, do you remember what chemo they were recommending for you?
5-FU and fluorouracil. 5-FU and leucovorin.
old
Sorry, 5-FU is fluorouracil.
Right. The old standbys of that era.
Which, I learned many years later that they'd been using the same drug for decades. The 5-FU, it was first, I think, developed maybe in the 70s or late 60s. So it's like, wait a second, you haven't come up with anything better in 30 plus years? But anyway, so I just started to, think about my life and my health and my future and like what I was going to do. And I didn't know what to do. And so I prayed about it. I'm a believer, and I just prayed and said, God, if there's another way besides chemotherapy, just, please show me. I don't know what to do, but I'm just trusting you to direct my steps, to light my path. I need help. And it was just a sincere prayer, but it was a faith-filled prayer. I really was putting it all out there and trusting God to provide for me and believing that he would. And 2 days later, I got a book from that was sent to me from a friend of my dad's who lives in Alaska. And he was a client of my dad. And his name's Al Strawn. And anyway, he sent me a book that was written by George Malcolmus. And Ralph, did you ever cross paths with George?
No.
So George, I start reading his book, and he is a colon cancer survivor. And his story was that he was diagnosed back in the 70s and didn't want to do chemo because he'd seen chemo kill his mother and other people. And he had a friend who said, you need to get on a raw food diet and start juicing carrots. And he's like, well, okay, I'll try that. And a year later, this cancer had healed. So I was really inspired by his story. And he's the person that cited you. He cited some of your research and findings in his book. And that's how I learned about you. So George, he's passed away now because he lived up into his 90s, I believe. But that was the first book I read that really gave me this encouragement and opened my eyes to the idea that healing was possible. And that's such a huge belief, right? It's huge. And in fact, it's what it's one of my biggest messages is that you have to believe that healing is possible. That's the foundation, right? And once you believe it's possible, then it unlocks your ability to read and research and learn, and it gives you this freedom. And one of the big problems in the cancer treatment world is that patients are not free. They are victims. They're victimized, and they become trapped in a system that caters to their victimhood and rewards them for being victims. And they're told there's nothing you did that contributed to your cancer. No, you don't need to change your diet. No, don't worry about, you don't have to quit smoking. No, you don't have to maybe cut back on the alcohol. Just cut back. Right. And no, you don't need to lose weight. Exercise if you want to, if it makes you feel good. And they're just given this weak, disempowering, victimizing advice. And so they go home and they tell their friends and family, well, my doctor said I don't have to change my diet. My doctor said it's not stress. That's not what caused my cancer. And you even see patients take on this sort of know-it-all attitude, right? They've had one meeting with the doctor, and now they're a know-it-all about cancer treatment and what's going to help them, what is going to help them.
You had intense pressure coming from your family, you said.
Yeah.
And even your beloved spouse and your beloved mother, I believe, they also were, whether overtly or subtly, putting pressure on you to, in their view, save your life by taking the chemo, right?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, when after I got a little bit into George's book and realized that the cancer could be healed, that people were healing with a radical change of diet and lifestyle, I was so encouraged by that and inspired by that. I was like, I'm doing it. This is what I'm going to do. I prayed, I asked for something, this showed up. It makes sense to me. And I'm excited to radically change my life and see what happens. So it was an immediate decision. Like, I'm doing this. And at the same time, in George's book, he was pretty aggressively critical of chemotherapy. And so I had doubts about doing chemotherapy and expressed those reservations. And when I did, I was met with a lot of resistance from people around me who were just like, you have to do chemo. What do you mean? Right? You don't you think if there's something better that they would know about it and the doctors would be using it? You have to do what the doctor says. So I was like hearing this message from a lot of people around me. In the very beginning, my mom was the only one who understood why I was making the decision I made. But everyone else didn't understand, and they love me. So I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, right? They all love me. They wanted me to live and not die, right? And they just, in their ignorance, just thought, well, you just have to do what everybody else does, not knowing how ineffective chemotherapy was for stage 3 colon cancer in a young adult, right? Like, they had no idea.
Especially the chemo that they were offering you at that time.
And then I found out later I have Lynch syndrome. And so with Lynch, I found out many years later, I was told by another oncologist, the one that does my follow-ups. He said, yeah, it's a good thing you didn't do chemo, because it wouldn't have helped you at all with Lynch. And I was like, that's amazing, right? That is amazing, because they didn't know that at the time, but they've since learned that it was, completely ineffective if you have Lynch, essentially. So my odds of survival were really grim, worse than I thought. But in order to appease the people around me, I went to see an oncologist, and the meeting did not go well. And I talk about it in the book, but he was just very clinical, very sort of, boilerplate pitch to me. You've got a 60% chance of living 5 years with treatment, which was highly exaggerated, by the way. But even me believing that at the time, I thought, that's not great. It's like 60%. It's like a coin toss up, pretty much, it's pretty close to 50. And I asked him if there were any alternatives available. And at that point, he just got really condescending. His demeanor shifted, and, he started to talk down to us, my wife and I, and just sort of, it was just a barrage of, exerting his authority and essentially saying in every way he could, if you don't do what I tell you to do, you're going to die. Right. And he said specifically, if you don't do chemotherapy, you're insane. Like, who talks to patients that way? Right. And so we left there, completely dejected, so discouraged, distraught, traumatized. It was just so much fear that was injected into us at that meeting. And I made an appointment to start chemo, right? He talked me into it out of fear. And that's what a lot of patients experience, right? They are rushed into treatment out of fear, and they have no idea what they're signing up for. And that actually prompted me to create something that's called 20 Questions for Your Oncologist. It's a free download. You can get it at chrisbeatcancer.com. There's a link to it on every page of my website. And that's just a guide that I created to help any patient or caregiver ask the right questions, because most patients don't know what questions to ask. And because they don't know what to ask, they inadvertently don't really ask important ones. They're just, am I going to miss work, or, this kind of things. But there's really important questions like, will this treatment cure me? Yes or no? Right? And you'd be surprised at how many patients don't ask that question. Maybe some of them are afraid to hear the answer. And what's the success rate? Will this cure me? Yes or no? Is this palliative or curative? So anyway, that's a free download. If anybody in your audience wants it, go to chrisbeatcancer.com. Just look for it. 20 questions for oncologists. And so I just happened to ask those two questions. I asked if there were any alternative therapies available, and I asked about the raw food diet. And just me asking two innocent questions. I wasn't there to fight, right? I didn't know anything. I'd been on a raw food diet for 1 week. I was feeling pretty good, but I didn't have any, I wasn't like, I'm going to get in there and tell him all about alternative treatments. I didn't know anything. Okay. But just seeing how quickly and he sort of turned on me, we never went back. And I found a naturopathic doctor that my mom had been seeing. I went to see him. He said, he was the first person to say, when I said, here's what I'm doing. I've just started a raw food diet. I've started juicing. I'm just trying to figure this out. He said, you made the right choice.
Was that Roy Page?
No, that was another guy. And he connected me with Roy Page. So he knew Dr. Roy Page, who was a career oncologist who had retired and then come back because he didn't like being retired. And in his second career as an oncologist, he had started doing IV vitamin C treatments. He was learning a lot about aloe and ace mannan and how much it helps the immune system and recommending that to patients. He was learning Chinese medicine, like studying Chinese medicine, going to conferences, and he was trying some other therapies, non-toxic therapies, right, to help his patients, because his whole career he'd been doing, the standard of care treatment, and he saw how ineffective it was. So he was an incredible gift to me, and he supported me. He ordered my blood work and my scans every 6 months. He didn't pressure me into any treatments. We did a bunch of IV vitamin C's in his office. And he was just as excited as I was when my scans would come back clear. I mean, it was just awesome. It's just such a sweet man. He's passed away now because he was in his 70s 20 years ago. But so I'm really thankful for Dr. Roy Page. He ended up losing his medical license for prescribing non-toxic treatments to patients.
Yeah.
So, but he was already at retirement age, so it didn't really matter. But I just.
How difficult did you find it, Chris, to transition to the raw food diet and the juicing? Sounds kind of time consuming and arduous.
It was
it?
So easy. It really was.
Really?
I mean, it was just, a switch flipped in my brain, and I was just like, I'll do it. There was no debating. There was no, I just went to Whole Foods, loaded up the cart with a bunch of vegetables, and I was like, I'll make a big salad, right? I know how to make a salad. I can do that. And I bought a juicer and a big bag of carrots, and like, I can figure out how to make some juice. And so, I mean, it was just immediately I was 100% in and committed to it. And
did your wife and your kids do it with you?
I didn't have any kids at the time, and my wife did not do it with me. I tried to drag her into it, which, was not good timing, and she was very resistant, and she was afraid that I was just going off the deep end and was going to die, right? Doing some quack therapy. But eventually she did come around. But I learned a very important lesson. Cancer teaches you so much. I have so many lessons I've learned, and I share them in the book. But one of those was that, sometimes you have to go it alone. When you're on a path like that, where for me as a believer, it's like I said earlier, I prayed and I feel like the Lord gave me an alternate path to take, and I took it. But if you take this alternate path, if you go off the main road, don't expect anybody to come with you, right? You're on your own for a while. And of course, I wasn't the first one to take this path, but it was not a well-worn path. You know what I'm saying? I liken it to hacking your way through the jungle, right? That's kind of what it felt like. It's like there's a path here somewhere. I know people have taken it. And so I just learned that I had to be okay with being misunderstood, with family members and friends thinking I was stupid and a fool and stubborn and all the things, right? That I was making a huge mistake. I just had to be at peace with people thinking whatever they wanted to about me, because, and the sad thing is that there's a sort of a psychological trap, that some cancer patients get stuck in, whereas they want to please everyone, right? And they just do the treatments just to please people. They do treatments they don't want to do because they feel like they should, and they ignore their instincts and their intuition, and they just want everyone to support them. And when you step off the path, your support evaporates. Like, that's hard. That was really hard for me to like I said, to know that like nobody understands. I'm totally alone here. It's just like, but in hindsight, I had a few things going for me. One is that I'm an only child. And so I'm used to doing things my way and being alone. And I was an entrepreneur and a business owner. And I was just always used to sort of charting my own path in life, even up to that point. So it was just like, well, it's just like everything else I do. So might as well just follow my instincts and my intuition and my faith. And here we go.
So there was a period of time when you were Chris Wark, the lonely lone individual, and the time you became Chris Wark, the pretty famous author. And I'm wondering how that transition happened. I mean, did you seek out other patients, or were they seeking you out? What was the path that you took?
6 years. Well, let's say 5 years after my diagnosis, I got another scan. And I was all clear. And after that happened, and by the way, up to that point, like, I didn't want to have anything to do with cancer. I wanted to get as far away from cancer as possible. It was scary. Like, it's traumatic. It's scary. It's a super intense season of life. Like, I was in real estate, and I was a musician playing like, I had a band and stuff. Like, I was like, I just want to do that stuff. I don't want to talk about cancer. But I started to get this nagging feeling that, I have an important message and story that will probably be encouraging to some people out there. And so I started kind of thinking about, what should I do? I feel like I should do something. And I'm not even sure how it all came together at the time, but I had a friend that I called and I was like, hey man, think maybe I should start a blog. I don't know how to start a blog, but do you know how? And he was like, yeah, I can help you. I can help you set it up. So my friend JP helped me set up a blog and WordPress, and I started Chris Beat Cancer. And I just was like, okay, I'm going to start writing some articles explaining my story and talking about raw food and juicing and nutrition and rebounding, and like just all the stuff I did, everything I'd learned in the last 6+ years. and YouTube was starting to pop. This was 2010. So like social media was really starting to grow. YouTube was it'd been around 3 years. Like it was starting to become a thing. And so then I was like, I could make some videos too and talk about this on video. And then a girl named Courtney Campbell reached out to me and she was like, I love your website. I also healed myself of cancer. And she had Hodgkin's lymphoma and healed herself with an approach almost the same as mine, like nutrition, lots of raw food, no treatment. And I was like, oh man, this is awesome. And she was younger than me. And I was like, well, what do you think about me interviewing you? And she was like, okay. So I interviewed her to share her story and then, and put it out there. And I didn't have hardly anybody. I mean, I didn't have an audience really. Maybe a few hundred people a month were listening or whatever. It wasn't much, but after I interviewed her, I was like, you know what? I should interview more cancer patients, more survivors. There's got to be more out there. So that really opened up my sort of, or gave me a clarity of mission, right? It's like, yeah, I can tell my story, but there's a ton more stories like mine that are even better. I mean, I had surgery. Courtney healed herself with no medical intervention. And I've done follow-ups with her. She's now like 15 or years out. And I've interviewed her several times. We've become great friends. She and her husband, Kevin, they have 5 kids or 6 kids, and they're in the Atlanta area and they're just doing awesome. Like she's incredible. Anti-cancer mom. If anybody wants to look her up, anti-cancer mom. She'd be a great interview for you, Ralph. So again, just posting on social media, sharing information, making videos, interviewing other survivors, and then interviewing doctors and experts and researchers. And it just kind of was just a part-time passion for 5 years. And then around 2015, I kind of took a step back and looked at everything. My audience had grown a lot. And I just realized, man, I think I can focus on this full time and really make this my life's work and quit real estate and everything. And so I did. And then, that gave me more free time. And then I wrote Chris Beat Cancer, the book that was published in 2018. And I created a coaching program called Square One. And I've written 2 more books since then, a Beat Cancer Kitchen, which is a plant-based cookbook, and then Beat Cancer Daily, which is a book of daily sort of devotional and encouragement, 365-day daily reader type book. So yeah, it just kind of all my part-time passion turned into, a profession. And it's like, I didn't have a grand vision of doing that. Right. It just was something that I just kept. I was like, I can't shut up about this. I got to keep talking about it. It seems, and little did I know, but I learned quickly that, oh man, there's a ton of people out there with cancer that are looking for this information, that need hope and encouragement, that want to change their lives, that have very little faith in conventional treatment because they've seen what it has done, or they've seen it fail, their loved ones. And so I just saw this movement happening and just thought, man, I really want to be a part of this. Like this is important. And here we are.
Did everybody that you were talking to follow basically the same program that you did, the raw foods and the juicing, or did you find that there was a variety of different paths that people took to get at the same result?
What I've found, and I've interviewed now somewhere around 100 long-term holistic survivors. And what I've found is that the vast majority of them ate a predominantly raw food diet, plant-based, whole food, plant-based, mostly raw diet. There's been a lot of, sort of dietary fads around cancer, keto or carnivore or whatever, but all the long-term survivors, and by the way, it's not like I wouldn't interview someone who did something different. I'm fine with it. But I just over and over and over, the people that I see get the best results in terms of survivability and being either putting their cancer into remission, where it stops growing and they just manage it forever, or completely eradicating it. Yeah, the whole food plant-based diet, that's a major common thread. But it's not the only thing, right? So some people, all the patients I interview, they're all taking lots of different supplements, right? Many of them are doing different types of alternative therapies, whether it's IV vitamin C or ozone therapy or hyperbaric, right? Or hyperthermia. There's a lot of therapies that people do that haven't really been studied in proper clinical trials, but they're therapies that have a potential benefit and no risk of harm. And so my particular MO when I was trying to get well was pretty simple. I just thought to myself, okay, if there's a potential benefit and no risk of harm, and if I can find it and afford it, I'll do it. Right. And so, and that's the same, my feelings haven't changed, right? Those are the kind of things that I want to introduce people to and make them aware of, and let them, listen to their instincts and intuition and pick therapies that they really feel led to. But the foundation, the nutritional part is huge. And then, exercise is just so critical. It really does strengthen your immune system. There's like cancer killing benefits of exercise, stress reduction, forgiveness. Like these are huge things. And I feel like those are the major pillars of every person who's ever healed is they radically change their diet. They start exercising, they detoxify their body through different methods, and they choose to forgive and really make things right. They get right with God. They forgive people that have hurt them. They ask for forgiveness for people that they're cross with. And they just reorder their life.
Why is forgiveness so important?
Well, thanks for asking. So earlier I mentioned stress, and this is really the stress component, is when you're in a state of chronic stress. And when I say stress, I mean distress, right? The bad type of stress versus eustress, which is like good stress, that it's like exercise is good stress. But when you're in a state of distress, there's 3 different sources of stress. We have stress that's based in the future, stress that's based in the present, and stress that's based in our past. So future-based stress would be fear, worry, and anxiety, right? We're thinking about the future. We're afraid of what could happen. We're worried about it. That creates stress in your body. And when you are stressed, your physical response is your body raises adrenaline and cortisol, and those circulating hormones suppress your immune system. And they also promote inflammation. And so we know from all this research that 2 main drivers of cancer are inflammation and immunosuppression. So generally speaking, that's why stress promotes cancer, right? Because of inflammation and immunosuppression. And then drilling down, okay, well, what specifically are your sources of stress? Are you worried? Are you a worrier? Are you constantly worrying about the future? And are you anxious and afraid? Is your stress based in the present where you're constantly comparing yourself to others? You're full of envy and jealousy and prejudice, right? Are you constantly picking fights and, causing drama, right? That's present stress. And then the stress that's based in your past is rooted in forgiveness, right? Anger, bitterness, and resentment toward people who've hurt you. So all that, and again, I go deep in this in my book, but it's important to sort of really lay your life out on the table and think about like, what is causing me stress? What are the mental bad habits that are just in heavy rotation in my brain. Again, like constant worrying, constantly being critical and comparing yourself to others and being jealous, and then also holding on to this angerness and bitterness. And so like they all have to be addressed different ways. But with with anger and bitterness and resentment, I mean, these are just toxic, destructive, harmful emotions. They really affect your physical body. And being angry isn't going to make you sick, next week. But when you hold on to that anger for months and years and even decades, it leads you down a path of disease. It weakens you. And if you think about it broadly, when you are stressed, how do you medicate? And the way we medicate our stresses are typically in destructive ways, right? Yeah, alcohol, cigarettes,
drugs.
I was thinking ice cream.
overeating, gambling, pornography, spending money you don't have, like technology addiction, right? Like binge watching or social media now. So like we have all these ways to self-medicate. The only one that is healthy is exercise. So some people actually medicate with exercise. Good for them. That's the best self-medication. So if you think about that, like we are bombarded with all this stress. And let's not forget, like all this, the news is constantly bad news and wars and conflict and politics, and right? And all that is contributing to your stress. Not to mention your own personal problems, like your financial problems, your relationship problems. So it's like, if you really like sit down with a pen and a pad and write like, what all am I stressed about? It's probably a pretty long list of stuff. I did that. I worked through that. Like every time I would be, cancer, I was not a worrier until I got cancer. And then every day, here comes the fear and the worry and the anxiety. What's coming? Am I getting better? Am I getting worse? Am I going to suffer? What's going to happen to my wife? Like, what's my legacy going to be? All these kind of things. And so I would just learn to quickly give my fears to God. When the fear would creep in, I would just say, God, I trust you. I'm not going to be afraid, right? I'm feeling the fear, but I'm just giving it to you, and I trust you. I'm not going to let this fear steal my joy and ruin my day. I'm not dying today, so I'm not going to be afraid. And, that's how I dealt with the future-based fears, right? The future anxiety and stress. And then the present, we've all heard this expression, mindfulness. And that's being aware of your thoughts, like being mindful of what you are thinking. What are you thinking about? And what are the emotions attached to your thoughts? And so when I would catch myself being envious or resentful of others because of their successes, or just because they were healthy and I wasn't, right? I would catch myself in that moment and be like, you know what? Okay, I'm being jealous. I'm being envious, and I'm going to choose not to be. I'm going to actually choose to be happy for that person. And yes.
Does that work?
But that's the first part A. Part B, which is also necessary, is gratitude. So in that same exact moment, I tell myself, and I still do this, okay, what's good in my life, right? Because their life looks pretty great. Man, I wish I had their life, right? We've all had those kind of feelings. Like, but what's good in my life? I've got a wife who loves me. I've got a roof over my head. I have enough money to pay the bills that are coming. We've got a baby on the way. By the way, my wife got pregnant about 4 months after I was diagnosed. I've got this really great dog. You know what I mean? I've got a family that loves me. And so as soon as I started counting my blessings, the jealousy and the envy and the resentments, they just would evaporate. And my perspective changes, right, to gratitude. So I still do that. I still do. It's just something you have to do. And so that's how I was dealing with that, with jealousy and envy and resentment and being critical. And I'd be like, you know what? I'm being judgmental. I'm being critical. I'm just going to stop. Right? It's like, stop, dude, just stop. You know what I mean? Like, and then with the stuff from my past, right? Anger and resentments and bitterness toward people in my past that had hurt me, whether they had, been verbally, I was never sexually abused. I mean, I'm just thankful to say, but I've certainly had people be abusive to me, physically, verbally. I've had people let me down, disappoint me, steal from me, right? I've just been hurt by a lot of people, as we all have. And so I just decided I'm going to forgive every single person who's ever hurt me until there's no one left. And you can't do that in one sitting, but it was just a decision I made. And so I would routinely just sit down in a prayerful state and just say, okay, God, who do I need to forgive? And I would just let the memories come up. Just work through them. I just think about what was, who was in my life in kindergarten. Was anyone mean to me on the playground, that I can remember? And then I would just forgive them. Right. And I just worked through it. I just thought about every person that has come and gone in my life, friends, family, coworkers, girlfriends, whatever, and forgave them all one by one by name. And I would just say, God, just a simple prayer, right? The forgiveness prayer is not complicated. It's just a decision. That's all it is. You just say, God, you know what they did, and you know how I feel about it, and I don't want to forgive them, but I'm choosing to forgive them, and I'm just giving it to you. They're all yours.
Did you communicate ever with the people that you were forgiving and
No.
have it out with them?
No.
It was just
Yeah.
on your side
And I
and
really
that worked
believe
for
it's
you?
not necessary. Because think about it. Some people that have hurt you are dead, right? And some people that have hurt you will never be sorry. And whether or not they're sorry or whether or not they're alive doesn't matter. What matters is that you release it, that you choose to let it go and just say, you know what? I'm not going to carry this bitterness. I'm not going to carry this anger anymore. And I just trust that God is a God of justice, that justice will be served. It doesn't have to be at my hand. And I need forgiveness, right? I need forgiveness. So if I'm not willing to forgive, how can I expect God to forgive me? Well, I can't. That's hypocritical. So I just, once I had that revelation, it was so freeing. So I was like, man, I'm just going to forgive everybody until there's no one left. And now I just live a life. And by the way, now people are more mean to me than ever. Okay. So it was good that I learned this lesson early before I got on the internet because I didn't really have any haters at all back then. And then, as soon as you get online and start talking about health or cancer or whatever, man, look out, here they come. They're coming after you, and they're relentless and vicious. But I learned this powerful lesson. It's really it's like a secret weapon for me is that, people.
I wonder, Chris, if you feel as though your diet had a contributing factor to your overall mood as well and your settled state as you're sort of describing
What we
it.
see with people who adopt a diet that's, when they go from a diet that's very heavy in processed food, fast food, and junk food, and tons of meat and dairy. And when they go from that to a diet that's just rich in fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, fresh juices, they get a surge of energy, and they do feel different. And because they feel different physiologically, they also feel different emotionally, mentally, emotionally. And whether that's a biochemical reaction, which part of it I think is, and the other is just when your body feels better, you're happier. I don't know. It's maybe a combination of both, but yeah, it's like people really do feel better. They're more optimistic. And then there's this other psychological effect of, when you are, when you're discouraged and you're depressed, it's hard to take action. You know that feeling, right? You just don't feel like doing anything. You kind of wallow in self-pity and languish. But if you just take some action, right? If you just get off the couch or you get out of bed and you just do something productive, you feel better. You get like a dopamine surge, and it improves your outlook, and you feel happier and you feel accomplished. And so we know that when we encourage people to radically change their diet and just take control of their health in a way they never have before, there's that psychological benefit that's happening where they feel empowered and optimistic and hopeful. So all that plays together. And whether it's just, the biochemical elements in healthy food, or it's the psychological benefit of changing your life, I think it's both. I'm more of an advocate for radical change, because I think radical change is easier to maintain than gradual change, right? So if a person decides, I'm gonna try to eat more vegetables. Okay, well, they might eat a few more vegetables today and maybe a few more vegetables here and there, but and maybe they'll feel a little better, but it doesn't make a big impact. And a few months go by and maybe they're just kind of back to the routine that they were when beforehand. Whereas when you decide, like, okay, I'm going all plant-based, doesn't have to be all raw, but like, I'm going 100% plant-based diet, not forever, but I'm going to do this as a personal experiment for the next 90 days. So this is what we encourage folks to do, right? I'm going to do this for 90 days, 100%, no excuses, no exceptions, hardcore. I can do this, and let's see what happens. So 90 days, whole food, plant-based, and then you just really see more significant results, right? It's like that old adage, massive action produces massive results, right? And so a little bit of healthy dabbling, it's hard. Is this helping? I don't know, maybe. Whereas you go hardcore and you notice, if it's helping you, you will notice quickly, within a week or two, things are going to start feeling different. You may maybe lose some excess weight. That's going to start coming off, right? Energy comes up. The first few days are always weird, right? Because you're detoxing. So if a person that eats a ton of fast food, processed food, and junk food, maybe drinks a lot of caffeine, the first 3 days, they're going to feel like crap, right? They're withdrawing from caffeine. They're withdrawing from high sugar, high salt, and high protein. And all those, all of those types of, and high fat, all those types of food groups, those macros, reward your pleasure centers. So it's like weaning off of drugs when you get off of those kind of foods. And so, yeah, the first few days, I've had people say, and we hear it all the time, and we always encourage them. It's like, man, I don't know. I don't know if I can do this. They're on day 2, I just don't feel good eating this way. And we're like, just hang in there. Hang in there. You're detoxing. Like you're suffering from withdrawal. Just hang in there. That you're going to get over this hump and you'll start to feel good. So yeah, I'm not a vegan, so I'm not promoting veganism. There's no like animal rights for me. That's not my motivator. It's helping people restore their health. And so my big encouragement is, like, again, if you've never done it, just treat it as a personal experiment and see what happens. Get your blood work done. Adopt a whole food plant-based diet for 90 days. Get your blood work checked at 90 days and weigh yourself, and just see, look at the difference.
I think that of all of the things that I know about you and your books, the empowerment to be on a healing journey is the most powerful one.
Thank you. I agree 100%. I know we're all on the same mission to educate, right? To inform people and to empower them with information that they can use to help themselves. The message that I'm putting out there is that cancer can be healed, right? That's the message, that you got to believe healing's possible, that it can be healed. And I love that that the Moss report, that both of you and your team are empowering people to help them heal.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris, for joining us. It's great to hear from you. And we look forward to staying in touch. But for now, for the Moss Report, I'm Ben Moss. How are you healing today?